Hello again, and welcome to another edition of Cookies Enabled. This main episode is covering the chip shortage that has hit the world. What is happening? Why are we stuck in this political climate? And how do we get out of it? All of those solutions and problems are going to be addressed right here in this episode, so stick around and let's learn something new together. So where do we begin? Where does this whole debacle of chip shortages start? Well, it honestly starts really just a few years ago when we started hitting the wall in the atomic world with chips. The transistor has now gotten so small that it really can't get much smaller. They can now put tens of thousands of transistors into the width of one human hair. So that's amazing. But you're not going to be able to cram much more transistors in there, if anything else, at this point, without getting too much interference. And that brings us to our first main principle here that we're going to be talking about, which is really the only one I'm going to bring up, and that's Moore's Law. That was created by Gordon Moore in 1965. And he stated that every 2 years, there should be a doubling of the densities of the transistors in each circuit, meaning that about every 2 to 4 years we should see a new manufacturer like Intel or somebody pumping out a new chip that is twice as fast as its last one but uses half as much power. Or in some cases it uses the same amount of power as it did before, but now it's half the size as it was before. And that's what we've been seeing lately. We have three main reasons that are why we're in this problem. So let's break down those three problems and really explain what's going on behind the scenes with each problem and the solutions. Okay, what are these three problems and why are they so hard to fix? Well, the first one is that our transistor levels are now as small as atoms, and they're not going to get any smaller than atoms. So that's really the biggest problem is, what do we do now? Once our transistors have gotten as small as they can go physically in our realm, what's the next step? And so that's the first problem. Second problem is that the chip complexity takes longer to figure out and longer to manufacture than 2 years is the estimated window. So even just pumping out our current chips, just because they're so small and so delicate, it takes even more time and more manpower to manufacture them. And that's slowing everything down because the demand has not slowed. It's actually increased. And that's problem number 2. So problem number 3 kind of bumps into problem number 2, which I already mentioned is too much demand. But the other problem is there is more, or definitely not enough growth in the big tech market. Definitely not in the United States or in Europe or the countries that consume the majority of these smart chips and, actual processing powers, GPUs, CPUs, and processing sockets that go into your cars, lawnmowers, drones, phones. Literally almost everything we purchase has a chip in it now, and guaranteed it does not it's not processed here in the United States for sure. They're not making it here. We only produce about 3% of the world's chips now. Now, back in the 70s and 60s and whatnot, we used to produce almost 20% of the world's chips. We were really, really good at it, super efficient. But because of political turmoils and oil and production and a bunch of random things, it made more sense for them to jump overseas to other countries. Now we're seeing Taiwan is the leading world kind of global chip manufacturer, at 80% of the world's chips come out of Taiwan. And then you have Thailand, South Korea, and that's pretty much it. The United States and a few other random ones just kind of fill in the blanks there. So that's a problem. We've got to fix this. Okay, I got to jump right to the solutions to these problems, only because it helps segue into a better explanation of our current world atmosphere. So Problem number one was the fact that the chip manufacturers are already hitting the transistors at atomic scales. They can't make those transistors any smaller. Oh no, what are we going to do? So, solution is the problem, or that we know that the chips aren't going to get any smaller. That's not actually a problem at all, but it's necessarily a way of re-engineering society. As cloud computing gets stronger and more proficient, we don't need as much power in our pockets. So they can actually re-engineer on this atomic scale all new chips that would probably be even easier to function with, like your main processing unit being out in the cloud rather than being in the device itself. So these are ways of them kind of re-engineering the same old ideas, and they've done this a long, long time ago. They used to do it with the Pentium processors. You'd have like the Pentium 2, the Pentium 3, the Pentium 4. This is exactly what they're going to start doing with all our current gen processors. In fact, they already do with the i7s and 3s and 9s and 12s and all that stuff. So don't worry about these numbers. Let's talk about solution number 2, since we kind of already bumped into it in solution number 1, which is the efficiency of the chips. With the cloud getting better, the chips and the engineers that make those chips are going to have more time to focus on what other features can we cram into these chips? What else can we make this chip do? You know, maybe we had just enough room to cram in extra memory, or add an AI unit or a logical processor someplace it wasn't usually there before, and this is going to help correct more errors or make your loading times faster or help it crunch through more data. So this is your solution to number 2, which is essentially the complexity of the chips. It's going to take them longer to manufacture. That is definitely a problem, but when they do come to market, they're going to have so many new bells and whistles crammed into these new chips that it's going to blow our minds. And this has already happened once thanks to Apple. Apple decided to say, we are done with you, Intel. Durr. We don't want to deal with your junky chips and your long timetables of getting them to market and then barely getting us the supply that we needed. So we're just going to make our own chips. And this is actually bumping into solution number 3, which is what I was talking about. There's too much demand and not enough growth individually in any of the countries in the big tech market. So what do I mean by that? And what is the solution? So that means that the big tech companies like Intel and AMD, Samsung, Qualcomm, they can't grow fast enough in some of these third world, second world, first world countries that they're in, and they're having a hard time. So some of them are actually relying back on the United States, Canada, Mexico, a few other random countries that are really close to the United States that can actually help and build these amazing factories and get things going again. Now, Intel has just dumped $20 billion in a new chip factory that's being built literally as I am producing this video right now in Ohio. So that is great. That's wonderful. And as I already noted, Apple had said, we're done with these holds. We're just going to make our own chips. And this is what I think a lot of companies will start doing, including Microsoft. Microsoft has already been making its own chips for quite some time. In fact, I have a few in the background here. Granted, they're not exactly their own design. They are AMD chips that have been redesigned by the Microsoft teams and then soldered to their boards and shipped out with their labels on them. So it's kind of a remaster or a re-engineering, solution number 3, of a chip that already existed to make it do something that it wasn't intended to do originally. In this case, playing video games. Definitely don't worry about that. I predict more companies, including Apple, Samsung, the big chip manufacturers and computer manufacturers, even Dell and IBM, I think are going to start jumping on this bandwagon of building more facilities to grow more chips. And that answers our demand for growth, thankfully. Okay, so now as I mentioned before, we have now had our problems listed, our solutions to those problems listed, and it sounds kind of good. except for the fact that, again, we're still building a lot of these factories. Now, I know I mentioned Intel building its new $20 billion factory in Ohio, but they are not the only ones. And actually, Samsung has jumped into the U.S. market and chose Texas to build its next $17 billion factory, which is supposed to begin production later this year. And so far, everything is on track. And I expect that to be done in the next 5 to 10 years. Same thing with Intel. I know Apple says it's producing its chips here in the United States, but I'm not even really sure where. I've been having a hard time finding that. So if you guys know about that one, drop it in the comments below, and we'll answer that for you guys there. So I did want to point out the government has definitely tried to help. I should say the presidents have tried to help the big tech industry for some time now. Actually, last 4 presidents, have all tried to do something to help the big tech industry, and were either shot down by either Congress or the Senate, or shot down by their own lobby members. And that is really the problem that we have here. And you can ask, again, check all my sources below, because I'm going to have a bunch posted for this video. This is a big deal. There are too many lobbyists pushing for big tech to stay in Taiwan, to stay in Thailand, and in South Korea. And that's great, but those are the other side of the world. Just shipping the chips over here is a huge liability, especially with the weather being as bad as it has been, and the global climate now being a total disaster. You don't want to ship holding tons of millions of dollars of chips sink or worse. So this is a problem. And that is why, again, you'll see a lot more of these companies jumping on board here in the United States. Even without the government's help, they have to get these chips manufactured. They know there's a ton of good workers here, and they can pay them well and get these chips manufactured and then sell them right here in the homeland, as well as around the world, much easier than trying to ship it back and forth, which is what they were doing before. Now, again, 20 years ago, it made more sense to do that. The global climate was perfect for shipping supplies around the globe in no time, and producing chips anywhere in the world was really easy. But getting demand for these special elements that are needed to make these chips is also getting harder to find. And another reason why they're coming back to the United States is because China and Taiwan, Thailand, and a few of these other countries, their prices are going up on these rare earth minerals, and ours are starting to come down. So they're coming back over here. And that's going to be a big game for the big tech, probably for the next 20 years, is just getting their roots around the globe, which shame on them for not already doing that and just relying on the global market to carry their supplies everywhere and, assemble chips wherever they wanted. Now they're not going to be able to do that. They're going to have to make chips on demand in those countries that need them when they are needed. And so that's what we're starting to see. And the governments have not seemed to figure this out yet. I really don't know why, and I'm sorry. I really wish I didn't have to bring it up at all, because we are not a political channel. But shame on all of the senators and congressmen for not trying to push these bills through and allow Intel, IBM, Apple, Samsung, all of these companies to just explode all over the United States. We could be bigger than Taiwan in chip manufacturing, but we are barely on the map. And that is a problem, considering we consume more than half of the world's global chips. So that's where we are. And I would say, if you really want to blame anybody, blame your senators and congressmen for not. As I had said earlier in the episode, it's not all bad news. We've got some great solutions out there, and there's other things on the horizon other than just chips, like quantum computers as well. So our chips in the futures will be cheaper and smarter and faster. They just might not be getting a ton smaller. So keep that in mind, and it may be about another 10 years before you start to see really cheap, good chips back in all your devices again, and this chip shortage is over with. So hang in there, everybody. I know I learned something new, and I hope you guys did too. We'll see you again next time. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Thanks, guys.